The Civil War is over. The Union has prevailed. More than 1 million Americans dead or wounded. Tens of thousands bankrupt, broken, homeless. The ashes of the Old South are all that remain of a way of life its people fought desperately to preserve. From the ruins, the South must now be rebuilt. Reconstruction, a complex and bitter period in American history, marked by great confusion, mismanagement, and misunderstanding. Surprisingly, an experiment in Reconstruction began on the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina less than a year after the war itself began. Here, at Port Royal, much of the trial and error and agony that would later be experienced all across the South was foreshadowed. Soon after Union armies took the islands, a kind of rehearsal for Reconstruction would begin.
Get the silver into the box. Emma, the linen. You two, go and get your things, and hurry. Where's James? James! Oh, there you are.
We can't take all this stuff. The Yankees will be here in no time at all. Get on out to the carriage. We're taking ourselves to Charles. Albert, Reynolds, the field hands. Get them up here quick. We're leaving at once. Yes, sir.
Hey! Hey, you niggers! Hey, wait a minute! Hold up a minute. Master going down the Charles. You want to go out there with me? No! I bet y'all better go up in the woods then. Oh, and don't mind shoot up in the air. We're going to the sky. Flee!
7,000 slaves were left behind by their former masters, who fled Port Royal to the comparative safety of the mainland. After centuries of repression, now there was jubilance.
The Yankees! The Yankees!
The Union needed a harbor from which to supply its fleet that was blockading rebel ports. It also wanted a rich cotton crop to help pay for the mounting costs of the war. The Sea Islands had a harbor and the best cotton in the South. Colonel William H. Reynolds was sent by the government to collect the captured cotton for shipment to the North. His interests, however, were not restricted to cotton. Plunder throughout the war and later was commonplace.
I want the furniture, books, jewels, and silver plate shipped to New York. We can sell the clothing locally. Strip the house bare.
Now, for the first time, the confused and destitute slave was expected to fend for himself. In an effort to help, the federal government sent a group of missionaries to the Sea Islands in the spring of 1862. They were called Gideonites and were chosen not only for their anti-slavery zeal, but also for the staunchness of their character. Their leader was a young lawyer, Edward Pierce.
We will prevent the deterioration of the plantation, secure their best cultivation, and promote the general welfare of the Negroes.
Amen.
We cross the prairie as of old, the pilgrims cross the...
Pierce had put forward a plan to the federal government for the social and economic development of the Sea Islands. The radicals in Lincoln's cabinet hoped that the results of Mr. Pierce's experiment would be of immediate and practical benefit at the end of the war.
A wall of men on freedom's southern line.
They were determined that slavery would not survive the war. At Port Royal, they hoped to show America how the former slave could qualify as an American citizen. Prominent among the 53 missionaries was Laura M. Town. Her background, like most of the others, was anti-alcohol as well as anti-slavery. Edward Philbrick, a successful architect and engineer, who donated $1,000 of his own money to the experiment.
I joined the expedition because I believed in the experiment. And I felt that I could be of some service, having been trained as a teacher, having had some medical knowledge. I felt that I could help them.
They need someone who has the practical skills to reorganize, to bring the South under the free enterprise system. Now, I know that the Southern system in the past has been inefficient. It does not work. Using free enterprise, we can make the South and the North function as a giant unit, an economic unit. And I'm here to try and help. I believe as much in abolition as much as the next man.
The missionaries called themselves Gideon's Band and compared their voyage with that of the Pilgrim Fathers.
I'm appointing a superintendent to each plantation and a teacher where it's possible. You, Mr. Philbrick, with your experience and know-how, are an obvious choice for a superintendent. I just wish the others were as well qualified.
Edward, I believe this experiment of yours will prove beyond doubt that free labor is far more profitable than mere slave labor. The former slave will work for money the same as anyone else.
Yes, we must convince the North that the Negro will work for his living without being whipped. We must prove it. We're approaching your plantation, Mr. Philbrick. Just remember, we come to these people to elevate, to purify, and to fit them in every way for the duty of American citizenship. You come as their friend, their counselor, and their protector.
Here, the anti-slavery crusaders of the North met the former slave on his own territory for the first time.
Hard work is colorblind, and its rewards are colorblind. In the marketplace, all men are equal, and they are judged according to their labors. You'll be paid for the cotton you plant and the cotton you pick, but for the cotton only.
But, sir, we've already started planting our fields with corn and vegetables.
Cotton. Any cotton?
Well, Mr. Philbrick, sir, you see, cotton's a slave crop. Well, now that we are free men, well, sir, we want to plant the kind of crops that'll keep us from starving.
Well, you're not free yet. In the eyes of the government, you are captured enemy property. No more, no less. In future, you'll be paid wages for working cotton. You'll be paid fair wages. But what do you want? Tobacco? Molasses? Clothes for yourself and your children? Medicine and much, much more besides. But how will you pay for so much? The answer is simple. From your wages. The harder you work, the more you make. He who works hardest will prosper most. And that's the difference between free labor and slave labor.
The message was clear. Cotton and more cotton. To the former slaves, slave labor and wage labor were not so different. Little seemed to have changed.
Samuel! 5 acres, $5. Make your mark, please.
The blacks received their first wages 2 months late.
Once the South is free, once the Negro is earning wages, Think of the potential market. Just think of it. The end of the war will create 4 million new consumers overnight. Didn't I tell you the Negro is motivated the same as any other man?
A pair of shoes? Who wants a pair of shoes? I've got a pair of shoes. I need one more. I've got one more pair of shoes. One pair of shoes? I've only got one size.
The goods were sold at prices somewhat higher than in the North.
Give me 5.
Very little was given away because charity was considered demoralizing.
Jacket? A jacket for your husband. How about it? Yes, now come on. You've got to have a jacket for your husband.
The missionaries, like most Northerners, were idealistic. They wanted to create New England and South Carolina, nothing less.
Mr. Philbrick certainly seems the proper businessman, doesn't he?
Well, he's enthusiastic and he's practical. That's a good combination and should hold us in good stead.
But does he understand that we're here for the benefit of the freedmen and not our own?
Well, officially, they're not free, you know. Officially, they're still contraband of war, so don't start putting ideas into their heads. No, what we have here is a heaven-sent opportunity to prepare the former slave to accept and fulfill the responsibilities of his imminent freedom. Don't forget that most of the North still assumes the black race is not only inferior, it also assumes it is incapable of learning.
The Gideonites' faith in the free enterprise system was matched only by their passion for education.
Aye. The next is very, very good.
The former slaves proved to be willing pupils. The older ones fought with their letters so as not to be disgraced by their children and grandchildren. The Yankee schoolmarm, and with her the public school system, came south during Reconstruction. And education became an ally of the northern businessman.
Now, these Negroes will do anything for us if we can just teach them.
True. They seem reluctant to work on the cotton instead of their own corn. I simply threatened to take away their primitives.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
It's fine to teach the Negro to write his name and to add up figures. But unless he has some sort of business he can make money, some sort of way he can enter the free enterprise system, it's all going to come to naught.
After 3 months, the experiment had taken root.
They seem happy enough, don't they? You know, if the world were to look in now, they'd see an example of a well-behaved, self-sufficient peasantry of which our nation has no reason to be ashamed.
But there was to be sudden change at Port Royal.
President Lincoln is sending you a protector, a much more powerful
From
man.
now on, the fate of the experiment was to be directed by the Army.
To care for you.
Mr. Pierce, the leader of the Gideonites, was leaving.
You must love him and obey him. I bid you farewell. And thank you. All of you.
I would like all of you who are sorry to see Mr. Pierce leave us to express your feelings by standing up.
To the skeptical North, Mr. Pierce had made his point. The black man was not only capable of learning, but he would also work without being whipped. Proclamation Day. After more than 200 years, slavery was finally banished from the North American continent.
My country is of the sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of thy pilgrims' pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring.
But freedom was now replaced by another issue, the disposal of rebel lands the government had seized for non-payment of taxes.
Very encouraging, I must say. Especially so since the government is about to sell the land here in lieu of the land taxes owed by the state of South Carolina. The state of South Carolina being somewhat less than forthcoming.
This could be such an opportunity for the people to buy their own land, to be self-sufficient and self-supporting. Their freedom backed by property could be the answer to so many of their problems.
Well, hardly. They haven't got the money. Now, I'm afraid it's much more likely that land sharks and speculators will come in here and ruin everything we've done.
Not necessarily. Not if we buy the land. I've convinced a group of businessmen in Boston to back me in purchasing as much of the land as possible. I'm tired of government inefficiency, which delays their wages. Philanthropy, which doesn't teach these people the value of a dollar. What this experiment needs is prompt businessmen. What it doesn't need are bureaucrats and reverends.
Mr. Philbrook, it seems to me that you are more interested in demonstrating the benefits of free enterprise than in helping the Negro.
Miss Town, without the benefits of free enterprise, the freedmen will have nothing. They will be impoverished.
What the Negro needs is to work his own land by himself, to be self-sufficient. The freedom you speak of seems to be the right to work them for as little as you want, for as long as you want.
Not true.
I'm not optimistic at this point. I do not believe that Mr. Philbrick and Mr. Gannett really understand the freedmen.
About 18, 225 acres. Who'll give me $1 an acre, make it $1 a quarter.
Less than a year after the black had first received wages, the first land sales took place.
Sold $1.50 an acre. Lot 18.
Mr. Philbrick,
Yes.
is it true you are attempting to discourage Albert and the others from buying their own land?
I pointed out the risk involved, and I've offered to take the risk for them for the first year, yes.
And the profits too, no doubt.
That's part of the risk, too, Miss Town, as I'm sure you know.
Miss Laura, he said he'd sell it back to us at the end of the year.
Suppose he doesn't.
Miss Town.
Will you sell it back to him if it proved a profitable piece of land? You take the risk, Albert. Mr. Philbrick's benevolence will work to no one's advantage but his own.
Yes, Miss Laura.
I'm not here to make a profit, Miss Town. I'm trying to keep these people out of the hands of bad men.
Is Albert bad? How many of your so-called bad men can you see here today?
Mr. Philbrick bought 11 plantations at a fraction of their pre-war value. In his first year of independent operations, he made a profit of $81,000. The blacks made wages.
There we go. Once, twice.
Why are you so against the freedmen having their own land?
My bones ache when I think what will happen. Plantations divided and subdivided into lots. And then when they die, chopped up even more as every son and relative claims his share.
At Port Royal and throughout the South, contract labor, tenant farming, and sharecropping were virtually all the freedman could look forward to for generations to come. While their women worked in the fields for new masters, nearly all the able-bodied blacks went into the army. There were many incentives. Military service was better paid than plantation work, and there was the possibility of getting preferential treatment in the distribution of captured lands. Many Northerners doubted that the freedman had the intelligence or the courage to fight for his freedom. But the blacks understood all too clearly what was at stake.
Maybe I should have kept my freedom and never enlisted in this army here. But then my children would be free, and they would always have it flung in their faces that their father never fought for his own freedom.
By the end of the war, there were more than 180,000 blacks in the Union forces, 85% of whom were ex-slaves. And while their battle honors were formidable, Black soldiers were expected to fight for less money than their white counterparts. But the black proved he would die for his freedom and rights.
Don't squeeze too hard, Miss Laura. You might disconnect something.
Come here. Sit down.
What's all these new faces around here? They passing out free molasses or something?
They're refugees from Sherman's campaign across Georgia.
Oh, that old bullwhip. Well, I seen him.
But they think this is the free place.
Former slaves flooded into the Sea Islands from all over the South because the experiment and the hopes it offered had become famous. General Sherman issued an order which designated coastal lands 30 miles to the interior available for black settlement.
The news. The wonderful news. General Sherman has provided land throughout this region exclusively for the freedmen.
Who said so, Miss Laura?
He's issued an official field order.
We got our own official government bureau, too. The Freedmen's Bureau guaranteed us that land.
Well, I'll be. Well, we're finally going to get what we wanted all along. 40 acres. What about the mule? They're going to give us the mule, too?
Yep, we're going to get the mule, too. And we got our own amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Makes our freedom official. It's number 13.
13? Why, that ain't such a lucky number.
The Freedmen's Bureau Act entitled every male citizen, whether refugee or freedman, to 40 acres of land at rental for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, these lands would then be offered for sale to the tenants.
Behold, the Lord thy God has set the land before
As the land
thee.
rush started, many of the Gideonites were ecstatic.
Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath said unto thee. Fear not, neither be discouraged.
The war was over. The Union had prevailed. And Abraham Lincoln, whose compassion was well suited to the problems of Reconstruction, was assassinated.
You can't just take our lands away and redistribute them. That is a denial of due process. It violates the sacred right of property. It is a precedent that will leave no one safe, not even the Yankees.
The new president, Andrew Johnson, was sympathetic to the southern landowners. Their lands were gradually restored, and land reform for the black fell apart all across the South, violently.
And what's left? The land, instead of belonging to the Negroes, is going back to the Southerners. The Negroes haven't been taught how to work on the land. Instead of growing cotton, they're growing just enough to stay alive. Everything's chopped up. No one seems to know what's going on. They certainly can't trust the government, and I can't say I blame them anymore.
Why are you taking our land away from us? You can't have it. It's ours.
We fought with the Union Army.
At Port Royal, the former slave proved that he was willing and able to work, to learn, and to fight for his freedom.
Now you double-crossers, two-timers.
Yet during Reconstruction, so surprisingly foreshadowed at Port Royal, America seemed unwilling to help its former slaves live now as free and equal men, denying the kind of legislation and justice that might have given meaning to freedom. For the black, the joy of emancipation turned quickly to bitter despair that has come down to this day. And Reconstruction goes on.
I will never leave them.
We didn't do very much. Not very much at all.
And make the West just like the Father.